Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Addison Brock, your CMC Ontario event manager. Welcome. A few housekeeping pointers for today. We ask that you remain muted unless called upon to speak. To ask a question, please type your question into the Q&A box. We will try to either let you ask the question live or read the question to the panel for you. We will have a couple of polls during the session. You should be able to see the poll pop up in your window, and you'll then have approximately 30 seconds to choose your option. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to our host for the day, Bernie Ulick, Vice President of CMC Ontario.
Thank you, Sandra, and welcome to our audience here. We've got an interesting smattering of people. We've got over 100 people participating here. We've got every province representative. We have a couple of people from Nunavut as well, so welcome and hello. And also we've got a couple of people from Europe and Asia. So good session here. I'm your host and moderator today on the session called Turning Crisis into Opportunities for Your Business. And we've built this around the theme here of races are won in the turns. That's why you see these little race cars all around the place, and more on that in the next couple of minutes. This is the first in our series of COVID-related disruption series activities. It's a trial of a dialogue with the audience as well amongst ourselves to share some of our thoughts and knowledge. The intent is to provide regular means to engage with everybody in our audience, as well as share actionable tips and techniques for things. So let's get us started and warmed up by going through our first poll and get everybody a chance to practice using the technology a bit. So Sandra, do you want to go into our first poll there? So first poll here is, which of these drivers, going along with our theme of Formula One racing here, is which drivers suffered the most embarrassing Formula One crashes? You should see a little poll bucket up on your screen. So if you just give a poll, we'll give you 30 seconds to fill in your answers. And then we'll see how many of you are familiar with our concepts today.
Okay, we're going to end the poll now.
Yep. Good. So looks like we've got Michael Schumacher and Ericsson that are pretty close on a tie, and then everybody else in the middle. So good. So thank you very much for waking up and participating. And Sandra, do you know the correct answer?
I didn't think there was a correct answer to that one. They were all pretty stupid accidents to have.
Oh, and I think that's probably a good response as well. And similar to disruptions is there's always another way to look at the problems. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here. Back to the topic of the day here is turning crisis into opportunities for your businesses. We started thinking about, how do you deal with disruptions? And I think the concept here was races are won in the turns. If you go in strong and you execute well in the turn and you don't bump into things and you don't go and crash or whatever, you'll come out stronger than you were before and you'll be ahead of your competitors. And the other key thing we thought about is crisis breeds opportunities. So you can see that in all the things happening, everything from people who are making fake products to companies that are completely reinventing. Like, who'd have thought that the auto industry would go from making sheet metal bending mechanical operations into creating cloth face masks in mass in the same factories. So there's a lot of things, and that brought us to the thought of, what will be the new normal for consultants? And I think part of the discussion we came up with here is not what's the new, but what's the next normal? And that comes from a thought of, we as consultants are supposedly innovative problem solvers, we're thought leaders, and we're trusted advisors. So we do this every day. Theoretically, the only thing that's different is the nature of the problem. But the way we approach the solutions is our core competence and part of what the value is that we have to deliver. So we assembled our team, our panelists here, and this is also the group of people that we got together and thought, wouldn't it be interesting to try this concept of engaging our audience? And the topics for today are going to be, what can we do to add value? And we thought we'd get different perspectives of what can we do, what are the challenges that we see, and then what are the opportunities. So on the panel that we've got here right now, we've got cross-country representation. We've got people from the East Coast, the West Coast, and everywhere in between. Multiple industries, private and public sectors as well. Now, to orchestrate the dialogue and to have some sense of sanity in this process today, we are going to have just one panelist go from one to the next, and we're going to go from top left to right and then down. And each person will spend a couple of minutes and just introduce themselves, give their perspective of what they see as the challenges and then the opportunities. We'll go through everybody, then we'll do a quick pause and then open it up for discussion amongst the rest of the group. So our panelists, you can see there's Eileen, hello, James, Stephen, Kara, Rahi, Louise, Ron, and myself. And we'll get going here now. So Eileen, why don't we start off with one, who you are and your perspective and what you see as challenges and opportunities.
Thanks so much, Bernie, and thanks everybody for joining us here today. My name is Eileen Bistrisky, and I have a boutique consulting firm called Effective Leadership Consulting. And I help small business teams with their strategic planning. And pre-COVID, I had a really strong focus in events, marketing, and tourism. And as you can well imagine, that whole field got really hit very, very, very hard. So what I was doing pre-COVID was I was helping companies who were particularly good at their thing. So it might be a catering company that was great at catering, or a lighting company great at lighting, or tourism, or they're really good at their thing, but they didn't have the expertise to step away from the business. So they're always going from proposals to servicing clients to proposals to servicing clients, and they didn't have the expertise to step out and look at strategy. So that's where I used to come in. Now, what's been happening in the face of COVID is, as you probably are well aware, events are not happening. Tourism and travel is not happening. So what I'm noticing are pretty big gaps in where I was playing that I can't fill, but perhaps some of you out there in the audience can. We started pretty quickly. So I'm very involved with international leadership for International Live Events Association, Meeting Professionals International. So 2 months ago, we started quickly regrouping and reorganizing and learning, like, what are some of our gaps. So we're obviously noticing a huge shift from in-person to virtual. We're noticing a need for touchless applications. So for example, I've noticed like hotels are now going to everything's on your phone, and you don't need a room key anymore. Your phone is going to be able to let you in and out of the room just by pressing on an app. So anything around technology, around going virtual and going touchless, huge opportunities. And then sadly, many of the clients that I was previously servicing are facing challenging situations with layoffs, with potential bankruptcies. So consulting and finance and HR are really desperately needed in my industry. So those are my high-level observations from my perspective, and I'm going to hand it over to James.
Thanks, Eileen. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is James Grieve. I'm joining you here today from Kelowna, BC. That's where my firm is based. My firm is called Value Driver Consulting. And pre-COVID, my firm was focused on positioning businesses for growth and sale. And when early March hit, I pivoted my business to accelerate the growth and recovery of businesses. And the way to do that is helping business owners understand and assess their current state and then determine their priorities in the short, medium, and long term. So obviously this has been very disruptive with what's happening. It seems things change day by day, week by week. Kind of the top three things that I'm seeing in the marketplace from the small to medium-sized businesses I work with is that they're looking for ways to reinvent themselves coming through the COVID crisis and how they're going to emerge stronger coming out of it. Secondly, they're looking for ways to rebuild or restart their business. So what's it going to look like coming out of this as far as physical layout of their business, the human element and their strategy? And then finally, how do they repackage their current products or services so that it aligns well with what their customers are looking for? And do that through a strong focus on the customer. I believe that's where it comes first, and also on the employee aspect of it as well. So thanks for the opportunity here today. Look forward to answering and asking questions as we go on, and I'll pass this along to Stephen now.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Bernie, and my other panelists. Thanks for all the viewers that are out there. My name is Stephen Parker. I'm based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We also have an office in Fredericton. So I lead a firm of about 15 consultants, primarily focused in public sector and healthcare. I'm also the current CMC Atlantic president, and my clients are primarily provincial government departments and health authorities in Atlantic Canada. So some of the challenges, wow, well, I guess the first thing is this is clearly a health issue and not an economic issue. And I guess my public sector side would like to kind of stress that because it's very different, of course, than many of the other challenges that the world has really faced before in this regard. So some of the challenges I think for our clients in many ways, and then our fellow consultants and firms. Will COVID-19 experience be leveraged as a catalyst to accelerate government towards citizen-centric practices? They've certainly been moving that way in many facets. Will it be more of a catalyst? Where will governments direct capital toward? How will they deal with recovery phases as we continue in this journey, all of us together, through stabilizing and addressing the lessons learned from this pandemic? Will governments have capital to invest in improvements, transformations, or basically bailouts, maybe taking a lot of that capital? Virtual project teams, how will municipal, provincial, and federal governments react to this? So some of the opportunities for consultants, again, as I say, I primarily work in public sector. So it's really, I think, consultants to assist governments in healthcare with continuing to push innovation around delivery to citizens. So we see in the healthcare side some interesting things on primary care, virtual care. So for instance, what percentage of family med visits can be done virtually, and citizen self-serve interfaces to continue and push out even more. And some of the lessons clearly coming out of this, governments and many people are rethinking the supply chains, reconsidering strategic reserves. Obviously, long-term care sectors have experienced across Canada in many areas significant morbidity and mortality rates. And what does that mean? What does it mean for what's termed alternative levels of care flow from acute care sectors into long-term care sectors? There's a lot of interesting work to be done there. And I'll close with thinking about or offering up significant work and opportunities needs to be done in protecting our most vulnerable populations. So clearly elderly, people with comorbidities, homeless, drug users, Indigenous communities, new immigrants. These are all challenges that COVID has really brought to the forefront. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kara, I believe is next. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, microphone?
Oh, there, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me today to speak on this panel with everybody. My name is Kara Wolf. I own an AI cybersecurity firm, and we create custom advanced solutions in all areas of cybersecurity. What I'm seeing in our practice areas, in particular pre-COVID and post, is an increase in the rate and sophistication of hackers and the damage that they're doing to organizations. And as everybody's been working remote from home, or there's been an increase in the attack surface, so there's been an increase in ransomware, in malware, in theft, and we've seen a lot of attacks that we haven't seen previously. The conversations that I have primarily are at the board level and the governance level, and it's a question of economics versus protection. So very much to Stephen's point about whether it's healthcare and economics, this is about cybersecurity and keeping your data and your people safe. So you know, what are the kinds of things that we're talking about? We're talking about how much it costs, how much protection do you really need, what are the kinds of tools that are effective, what works and what doesn't. And we're wondering and asking the questions about directors allocating more capital towards cybersecurity spending. What is their responsibility and role in the event of a death? Should they be held liable? where does insurance play a role? Are the insurance companies going to be paying out if companies aren't investing enough in cybersecurity? How will data be kept secure in the future? And then, you know, on the consulting side, what can we do to provide benefit in building security operations centers and provide best practices and tips, both to not only for enterprise level, but to small and medium-sized businesses that don't exactly have a budget to hire their own security analysts or their own security personnel. So what kind of packaging opportunities do we have? Can we build product and white label it for sale through other CMCs? And how can we work together as CMCs with different backgrounds and different skill sets to leverage our designation and build up the brand reputation and increase the offerings that we have? So with that, I am going to turn it over to Rahi next.
Yeah. And just a sec, Rahi. Can I just add one thing there for the folks here? We also have a chat, an online question and answer session. And as you're going through and thinking up questions that you'd like to ask, this is a good opportunity for you just to pull up the Q&A, type in a question if you've got either for a specific person. And if you've got something that you'd like to offer as well, that's another thing to put into there as well. And we'll be tracking and monitoring that as we go. So just as you're going through this now is a good time if you come up with thoughts to just enter them up in the Q&A. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Rahi, carry on.
Well, that's all right. I'd like to thank Kara and Bernie and all of our panel members and guests. My name is Rahi Tajzadeh. I run a boutique consulting firm called The Big Leaf, and we focus on small to medium enterprises. We help them to perform business planning, to carry out primary and secondary research, validation, value proposition development, entrepreneurship, and scale. Some of the challenges that I'm seeing right now in this environment are a reflection of the lack of proper business planning that's taking place in small to medium enterprises. The lack of proper planning, research, and validation increases your risk of not being viable in the long term. We know that 8 out of 10 businesses don't survive beyond 5 years as it is. And a good portion of them do engage in business planning, but they're typically not conducted properly in an unbiased and objective manner. There's a lack of critical thinking and strategy development, and typically that's because most entrepreneurs and small business owners just don't have the background, and it's something that as consultants, it's definitely an opportunity for us to help them out with. There's also a lack of quality industry and market information for a lot of businesses. It's easy to ignore quality information and sources of good data. It's a lot more difficult to find them and then to mine them and to seek patterns and opportunities and different areas to validate, to create value for your customers. And so we can appreciate and respect that, but at the same time, it does increase risk. Now in the black swan world, or in this COVID world, which is a black swan event, I find that this is not only becoming a little bit worse because people are struggling and people are scrambling to try to maintain cash flows. But at the same time, the problems that arise from improper business planning or a lack of quality information, they scale in events like a black swan. They actually present themselves, and you can see that from a lot of businesses going under. I think my favorite example is the airline industry. They were bailed out once already. And instead of hanging on to that cash for an event like this, they decided to do stock buyout. So not a good long-term strategy. I believe that as consultants, if we educate our clientele about both the black swan events and the business planning methodology, that we can help them to reduce risk and improve their probability of long-term success. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Louise Harris.
Microphone. Certainly.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thanks, Rahi. I'm Louise Harris. I'm currently residing in Newfoundland on the East Coast, and I do consult right across Canada. My primary focus is of advising, coaching, supporting, teaching executive management and other consultants in designing change, transformative change, digital transformation, cultural transformation, service delivery, innovation. I work a lot with medium to large organizations, public and private sector. And I've also worked with solopreneur organizations as well. And what I'm noticing definitely is, you know, on one hand, there's organizations that are feeling like the rug has been completely pulled out from under them. And leaders in those organizations, especially ones that are being really impacted in tourism and entertainment, travel, they have never, you know, back to what Rahi has said about being able to think strategically or plan, they've actually never really done that before, much of it. And so they don't know where to start and how to navigate in this really uncertain world. And they actually need someone to come alongside them and help them. And it is a combination, I think, of a coaching consulting opportunity. And I think, you know, for many of us, I think that's the big opportunity to add additional value, is to not only advise, but to actually also come alongside and coach and mentor. And on the other hand, you know, there's many organizations, they've continued operations, they've shifted everybody to work from home. And they're now realizing that bringing everybody back to the office is going to be a much bigger undertaking than it was to shift everyone to work from home temporarily. There's going to be new health and safety regulations, new expectations from employees, all kinds of things that they haven't even thought through. And in the meantime, they have, you know, these organizations, like all of us, have been undergoing transformation in how we connect with each other. There's things that have worked fine because they're temporary, may not work as well permanently. So there'll be a lot of thinking and discovering, and nobody has really charted that path before. So again, I think the opportunity for us in adding value is to come alongside and help people chart that path. There is no research really that we can go to and say, here's the path. There's a lot of research we can bring to bear to say, you know, here's what you can use to figure out what's the best path. But again, very much on alongside. I think organizations, you know, talking about larger organizations that have not invested in developing their leadership, in developing the ability for leaders throughout their organization to design and implement change, they're struggling right now because it's going to take a whole company effort to migrate through this. So again, I think there's opportunities for leadership development and coaching and helping people think strategically. I'm really finding that a lot as well. I'm currently teaching an MBA course on change management, and what the students are struggling the most with is thinking strategically rather than tactically. And so, you know, the other opportunity that I think that we have is organizations are facing challenges in many different areas. And I think there's opportunity for us, especially as boutique consultants and independent consultants, to form partnerships and to bring others along who maybe have an area of expertise that we don't. People are really looking for consultants, I think, that have specific expertise, not generalists. They need some sense of confidence that you can help them through this. So that's my perspective on the challenges and opportunities, and I'm going to hand it over to Ron.
Hey, Louise, thanks. Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody. Am I on audio? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, good.
So I'm Ron Schwartz, and I have to say I truly love trying to have a comment that's worthwhile after all these smart people have had something to say here. So I'm gonna jump with that. What we do is I run a strategic analytics business, and what that really is for us is we really focus on helping our clients tilt the playing field in their favor, figuring out how to use data and how to understand what the data is telling them and how to exploit the data to really have much higher probability bets. And we talk about that a lot in terms of closing the expectations gap, that is the difference between what they expect they should be able to do and what they aren't really able to do without extra help. And that's the gap that we will close. We do a lot of work with insurance companies, with banks. We do a lot of work with medium-sized companies that are working to get bigger, but quick serve restaurants and education providers and a whole bunch of things. But our view of what's going on from our perspective is that we're in a kind of something of an unprecedented time. That's really quite startling. If someone had told you 4 months ago that Hertz and Neiman Marcus were going to be filing for restructuring protection in the US, you'd have said, no, I don't think so. I think that may be what you predict, but really. So I think that, you look at that, you look at airlines. I think airline revenue, cruise line revenue, I think Eileen was talking about this. I don't know how you run a business when your revenue line goes to zero. Restaurants are large and small. They're going to have to engineer a path through higher costs, lower safety, and lower revenues. That's really tough. So if you have a global supply chain as a company, you have unimaginable realities that would have been unimaginable 3 or 4 months ago. So what our clients are doing, what we see our clients doing, is they're doing one of 3 things, all of them, and we can put them cleanly into buckets, frankly. They're attacking, they're holding steady, or they're clinging on with anything they can cling on with. And what we're trying to do for them is figure out where they are, where they're going, and not the new normal, because we're not that smart. But I think we can get a lot of data to help them figure out what the next normal might be for a little while. And so that's kind of our big thing at this point. And we're looking for data to inform planning. We're looking for data to help people get the next thing done. We're doing, we have kind of lots of little examples, but a bunch of stuff is kind of helping people figure out where to spend that next dollar in the next 6 months, because their investment is likely to be more successful this way than that, is kind of where we're headed. We know for sure some companies are going to emerge much stronger than the rest 6 months from now. And that's a little trite to say, but we think our goal, and every consultant's goal, probably ought to be to help your clients become the successful ones and emerge stronger, better positioned. And that's the kind of thing we're kind of zeroing in on. And I think, I think you probably heard it also from another participant or two, but I think we're also of the view that our perspective is that this can be ratcheted up to, we can help deliver services through other consultants too. And we can help kind of in a broader way and white label stuff. So I think that's kind of very interesting from our point of view, if data is helpful. So Bernie, over to you. It's kind of where we see it.
Yeah, good. Some great inputs in there as well. My background as well is I do global supply chain and IT transformational change project leadership. Some of my projects have included redoing the supply chain for Coca-Cola Canada in the height of the cola wars to help us win, as well as I spent many years with Celestica, the electronics giant in Canada, running their global mergers and acquisitions and supply chain and IT operational elements. And at that time, we pioneered a lot of things like, a lot of disruptions and recessions and restructurings of companies. So we went with a lot of companies, e-commerce and the whole business to business concept, the importance of partnerships that come in and building and connecting up your partners and making things happen. Setting up fulfillment operations for Dell, which today is what Amazon and Loblaws and all these guys are doing, the ability to process orders of one instead of a big box with 1,000 things in it. Now you've got to process 1,000 orders of one and get them to a person's doorstep. And one of my projects thereafter was with Indigo Chapter, setting up their online shopping and their same-day delivery service. So the importance of partnerships. The key observations I made from that was, in disruptions, the strong get stronger and the weak get weaker. And the biggest game changer we've had really has been communications and the online capability, not what the basics are. And I'm seeing there's a lot of execution problems right now. And I also see that the tools that are capabilities used to be very expensive, but they're now available to the average person using the cloud and Microsoft and some of these places. You used to have to spend millions and millions and millions putting in place SAP and some big infrastructures. Nowadays, you can buy that for $300 to $500 a person for a seat. So, you know, that playing field has really changed things. The challenges I see is we need to execute well, things like, you know, supply chain, manufacturing, and retail, pivoting quickly and leveraging partners in e-commerce to hook them up to make things, get that information moving quicker so you can glue your partners together quickly. Two, I think the other challenge I see is being strategic in tactical times. That's a word I heard from the Gartner folks a couple of weeks ago, and it really hit me. People panic and have fear in these times. That's what's driving behavior. And cash is king. They fight to survive. They hoard their money, and they don't want to invest, and it becomes tunnel vision. So they need to solve problems quickly. And one of the things that we need to bring to the table, I think, is getting rid of the word can't. Like there's a solution to a problem identified, and that's what consultants do very well, I would hope. And then the next step there is really to get stronger, you need to rethink your core competencies, reset major projects that have been delayed, and consider new technology investments. Those are some of the challenges. The opportunities then that I see are execution, helping companies with just basic diagnostics, leadership and education, as Louise was saying. It's a big problem. Companies have a lot of new people that they've had in place. Some of them have gotten sick and having to do other jobs. Some of them are just totally out of their depth. Basic execution, change management, and then helping them get their renewal back in place. Those are all things that are our core competence that we should be able to bring to the table and make things happen. So with that, that's my perspective. Thank you to all the panelists right now. Why don't we just change the pace here, and as we open up the dialogue and I see some questions coming up, we'll do another quick panel just to get an understanding of what the audience is like and your interests. This is a multiple choice question, I believe. And you know, what are the industries? And just take a couple of seconds here to just fill in this question so we get an understanding, and then we'll roll into the. I see a couple of questions coming up on the Q&A here already, so we'll start with the Q&A in a minute.
Okay, we will be ending the poll now.
Okay, good. So it's got a good smattering of change management and general consultants in public sector, private sector, a little bit of everything. The retailers was a little bit slow on the uptake there, but they're back in now. Good. So thank you very much for all that input and giving us an idea. Let's start off with questions and answers here. Here's a question from Steve Donahoe from Ontario. I'll just make this open, and maybe one of the panelists wants to start us off with just raise your hand as to who wants to answer the question. And so how difficult is it in today's environment to attract and maintain the attention of senior management personnel who are perhaps more focused on more immediate and pressing concerns? Who wants to grab that one? Okay, Louise, you're first up. Microphone on mute. There you go.
Yeah. Yes. So certainly with medium, larger size organizations, it's difficult. It is difficult. And the way that I'm doing it, because I am plugged in a number of initiatives, is just constant reminder, leveraging every opportunity where they're focused on something short term to say, and where do you see this going long term? How is this going to contribute to long term? What do we need to think about long term that might impact the decision that we make short term, so that we're better prepared to be long term? And one of the things that I think is useful is a lot of organizations are expecting a revenue drop next year. And this year. And so therefore they are actually concerned about doing things more effectively. And so that concept of what do we need to think about in terms of our short-term choices that will set us up for long-term is one way that's you can attract that attention. Ron.
Okay, Stephen, you have a point there. Just put your microphone off mute.
Sure, thanks. I might have jumped in front of Ron. I just want to quickly say on the public sector side, it's extremely difficult, of course, because they're really actively engaged. And quite literally, some of these are health, life and death decisions that are underway. We're fortunate enough that we're still doing a bit of work in healthcare and certainly doing a lot of work in public sector. So it's very hard for consultants in that space to get mind share. It's adding value when you are fortunate enough to be working, as we all do with our clients, and trying in the public sector side to get the timing right and to try to be impactful when this starts to turn through the next phases. Thank you.
Okay, Ron, you had any point?
Yeah, I think the how hard it is to get everybody's attention question bears a little bit on how we think about the problem. And I think that, in a crisis, there are, in almost every crisis, there's kind of three phases to it. There's the put out the fire phase. There's the help people who were affected by the fire phase. And then there's the what's next and how do we, once we're past that, kind of helping a few people recover, the people who needed to recover, what's next and what do we do about making sure it doesn't happen again kind of phase. If they're in the putting out the fire phase, you're not getting their attention. I think that's the short answer on that from my point of view. And I think that might be right. So I think that there's a kind of a bunch of steps along the way in terms of thinking through what the right thing is. So getting the fire out is first for people, and that's a different thing in every company, in every situation. And then there's the, when they're in the recovery though, and when they're in the starting to help people recover a little bit, that's when they start to turn around and say, now I need to have a bit of a broader view. And if you're there helpfully with whatever it is they need passed to the next, they'll turn to you.
Okay, Rahi.
Very briefly, I'm going to channel my colleague who's an HR, a CHRL, and an MBA. I would advise companies look at their senior managers and executives as a form of a customer. It's such an important position to long-term strategy and resiliency of the company that you want to be aware of your candidate's own personal journey and where they are, and make a solid value proposition to them that your opportunity for them, that the position that you're offering them is a necessary or very valuable step for them to move in their journey. I mean, everybody to a certain degree is selfish, and that's fine. That's healthy. We're all profit oriented, but it's very important to be fully aware of the journey that the executives that you want to join your team are taking, where they are and how you can help them to move forward, rather than to just fill a role that'll benefit your company. I think it's a team effort. And so you want the people at the top to be the most motivated and to share the vision that you have. And they definitely need to know how it's going to help them.
Okay. Did any of the other panels have a I noticed also Keith Harrington, he had his hand up for a question. He's dialing in, I think. If you want, raise your hand again, and then I'll open you up. In the meantime, I'll go to another question here. This one's from Tim Kist. How about the new extraordinary instead of just getting to normal again? Who wants to tackle that one?
I can take
Eileen, Eileen, and then James.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because the number of times I've been on calls like this where nobody wants to, no one wants to talk about the new normal anymore. No one wants to use the word pivot anymore. There's a certain degree of languages that we're starting to develop a bit of a resistance against. So I like the idea of extraordinary as something to shoot towards. I think that's brilliant. And thank you for, introducing that vocabulary to this group here. And I think we should all collectively be thinking about terms that are positive, forward-thinking, solution-focused. And one other thing that I didn't mention when we were going around, but this kind of ties into this a little bit, and that is that ultimately at this stage, I think the number one most important thing as consultants is to understand humanity, human feelings, because it's the human interactions that's going to drive success or failure in businesses, and how we're feeling about things like words, like what we're shooting towards, is not to be underestimated or undervalued in importance. And, for those companies who are in the process of, like just pure survival mode, sometimes that connectivity to how they're feeling, and that, many of my clients right now are not in any position to pay me because they're on, laying off staff and on the verge of bankruptcy. But if I can work with them to just focus on relationship building, even though they're not paying me right now, I think that'll go a long way to setting the pathway to this extraordinary future that we can all embrace.
Thanks, Eileen. Tim, that's a really good question. And Eileen, I'll build on that. I think what's interesting is the velocity of change here is happening rapidly. And one thing I'm finding with my clients, I said that you take it back to the basics, right? So when you look down, this is a really good time to systemize the business and to niche down, to find out what you're really good at. And regardless of your industry, or if you're a consultant, or if you're in business, is just to really clearly define now what problem your business is trying to solve, and who's most affected by this problem. What does your company do to solve this problem? And what gives you an enduring competitive advantage? So to Rahi's point on getting deep into value proposition and building the business out from this, I think it's really key there. And then what will the world look like when you solve this problem? So now is the opportunity to stop, reset, find out what that looks like, and then come out the other end stronger. And then define clearly what you've, like, how do you know when you solve this problem? And ultimately, how is it going to make money coming out of this, right? So to build also on what Louise said, we can't do all this alone. So perhaps the solution isn't what you normally had in your toolbox. So this is a perfect time to reach out to community. And I'm seeing that in a lot, from March 15th forward to now, is that you really get to find your tribe and find out who you can leverage to do that. So those are kind of the 7 questions I would think you would ask people going forward from that. And I'm glad to elaborate or share with others. Ron, do you want to pick this up?
And then Stephen.
Yeah, I think you're raising a really good question, James, and I think it bears on, excuse me, what we as consultants can do in these very unique circumstances, and Eileen touched on it a little bit too. What we did 4 months ago probably is not the most important thing for many of the people we might still want to do it, but it's probably not the most important thing for many of the people we were doing it for. And finding something else that really is really important to help them with in the next 2, 3, 4 months might really help them a lot in some meaningful way. And I think that's a really good perspective to bring to all of this. So I think that's a really important question. And I know we're adapting our offerings a little bit. So, we've dusted off some of our scenario planning work that we, hadn't been doing for a little bit of time. And suddenly there's a huge interest in it. We're about to launch a data product that we would never have launched before that helps people navigate the facts of what's going on in many jurisdictions if you operate in many jurisdictions. So that's a really tough problem if you have a planning problem related to multiple jurisdictions. So I think these are little things from our point of view. They weren't things we would have done, and but it's a little bit like the manufacturers repurposed his assembly line to produce PPE. We can do some of that too in a bunch of little ways also, and I think we need to be thinking about that for our clients.
Okay, Stephen?
Yes, I agree with everything I'm hearing there. I think, Tim, great question on extraordinary. And I think, people can always look with the rearview mirror, and we have to transition through it. Certainly in healthcare and public sector, there are an amazing number of opportunities to address some of the shortcomings and the lessons learned, right? So certainly, if we think of the long-term care sector, and have we failed? I think there's going to be national debates. There's national debates underway already. We look at some of the most vulnerable populations and what has occurred there. And I've got a few more years, hopefully, before I get in that area, but it's getting closer. And I think it's all a personal thing, right? If we can't take care of some of the most vulnerable people, what are we doing as a society and citizens? So I think the readjustment of capital into some of these areas are going to create huge opportunities to assist government, to assist healthcare in a variety of work going forward. So I think they are extraordinary times to maybe right some of the wrongs, if I'd be so bold to say that, for some of our populations in society.
Okay, any other points on that one? Okay, next.
I've got something to add to that.
Kara and then Louise.
Sure. It's a great time right now to take a good look at technology, innovation and adoption. I've seen a lot of companies that really come through crisis that have been able to take a look at at all of their business processes and automate what they can in order to leverage the brain trust that they have within the organizations and to reduce their costs. So to me, extraordinary looks at the intersection of humankind, to Eileen's point, righting the wrongs of what we've done in the past, to Stephen's point, and really creating a blank canvas where we can dream big and boldly and create new paths where we haven't gone before. That to me is what extraordinary is, and the opportunity that we have before us.
Okay, great. Louise?
Yes, and building on top of that, I'm also seeing, as far as extraordinary goes, in industries that are perhaps not typically considered the most empathetic or friendly types of industries. But I'm seeing a change in the internal attitudes at the leadership level, because everybody is in the same boat, from the CEO down to the mailroom clerk. Everybody is working from home. Everybody is dealing with this crisis, and it's developing a sense of empathy that I haven't seen before. Certainly, there's a lot more emphasis on mental health and dealing with stress and understanding, what people are going through at home as well, and working through that, changing the way that teams work, bringing a little bit more personalization into the teams. So, and I know that there is a whole sector out there, or I guess a movement, to bring more human consciousness into industry and into economics. And I think we have an extraordinary opportunity to do that, because we have the attention, and if we were to grasp that now, there could be quite a lot of change made in the way organizations work and treat their employees.
Okay, good. Move on to the next question then. Oh, this one's for me. Given the court case, re-extradition of Huawei executive, what short and long-term risks to global China supply chains do we need to be more concerned with? Okay, well, I'll stay away from the political aspect because I haven't got a clue of where that's going. But I think the question is on supply chains, and it goes down to a combination of how consultants are going to be able to help bridge the gap. One, I think, is as consultants, we need to look at problems, options, breakthroughs that we need to solve the problem, and then come up with a plan. The other thing that consider is the point, facts are friendly. So what are the facts? And make sure that this thing isn't just a political exercise, because I think right now the current situation is a negotiation process in a broader trade exercise that's working through. So take the symptom apart and look at what's the impact potentially on supply chains. And I think the key here is people do business with people. And it's about relationships. It's about trust. It's about partnerships as we move forward, and negotiating skills. I mean, everything is a negotiation, right? You want something from somebody, they want something from you. Within that backdrop, what's the impact on supply chains? Well, especially between China, is about trade. People do business with people, so you've got to know the people on the other side. They have to trust you. When you ask them for something, they need to trust that you're asking with credibility and that you give it back. My experience is being the same, is until you build that relationship with people and build that partnership, it's connect with people, communicate, and then you can start to collaborate. Once you establish that relationship, I would like to do this with you. You get a communication going, you come up with a price and a terms and a relationship. In the short term, that's how you build it. Longer term, the volume increases, the credibility increases, the excitement and enthusiasm gets higher, more business volume starts to go through. They tell their friends, you tell their friends, and you start building networks of partners. But the short term is you've got to build those relationships and not blow them up. And you need to connect, communicate, and collaborate, because that's the engine of growth and that's what's going to help things move along. And in the longer term, I think everybody's got something to contribute. I was talking with some of my friends at Canada Goose, for instance. They got into the business of making gowns for hospital people. One of the challenges that they had is, you know, everybody pivots and starts, well, we'll make it ourselves. Okay, interesting problem. Did you know that the majority of the supplies that go into H1, into those N95 masks, are consumable materials of a certain quality? There's only actually one place in the planet that has enough capability to make that, which is, guess what? China. So all of a sudden, the stuff that you need as raw materials to pivot to a thing that you can do it yourself, you actually can't. And it starts to dry up. So now it's really useful to have another relationship with somebody else in China, in the clothing industry in this particular example, that they have other materials that are used in higher end luxury goods and products that could accomplish something similar to this. So now you get into alternates and substitutions, which is, I think, a fundamental issue within the whole supply chain industry. Is good strategic sourcing means that you have the ability to have alternate suppliers, the ability to second source, and to do a bunch of different things and not just be locked into one. So you've got to hedge your bets and manage your risk. All of this is standard stuff that consultants should be thinking through in terms of risk management, risk mitigation, alternatives, et cetera, and connecting and communicating and recognizing that not all the answers are there. So again, short term, build and maintain your relationships, because they might have something you need and they might not, but they'll remember you. And believe me, when they talk about certain cultures in certain countries that have minds like an elephant, when you least expect it, the last thing you want them to remember when you really need help is that you poked them in the eye with a sharp stick. So short term, build the relationships. Long term, grow those relationships and build, and everybody ends up prospering. So that's my blah, 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 and I hope I don't get thrown in jail for saying something silly. Okay, anybody else on that one?
So Bernie, one thought on this. I think the answer is really interesting, and I've been kind of thinking about it a little bit, but I think there's a range of possible big picture scenarios, right? The going forward assumption we all want to make is that at some point we all get back to something we recognize as normal in global supply chains. What happens if that doesn't actually happen? And I think there's a way to maybe take one of the next meetings, rather than try to answer that on this call, and use that as kind of a debate format to have kind of trigger what are some of the signposts we might see and what are some of the conversations we might have about how this might play itself out. Because I think that's one of the very big questions that we don't actually know an answer for. And anybody who tells you that they really know the answer, they're not, that's a bold posture. Anyhow, just food for thought on a conversation and a subsequent conversation.
Okay, good. We're running short on time here. So what I'd like each of our panelists to do is maybe just think of the one takeaway that you have from this exercise, and we'll run a quick poll first, so I'll give you a chance to get your mind around this. We'll do another quick poll here to help us plan the next session, which is, you know, kind of some general parameters around what we'd like next. So, you know, just give a thought to the one thing you'd like to share as a takeaway, and then we'll move towards the conclusion. So if we want to put the poll up there. Yeah, the poll is, oh, it's already there and I don't even have to introduce it. You know, technology trends, which do you think are appropriate? Okay, it looks like it's settling in there, so let's end the poll there. Okay. Automation, certainly some interesting things I've seen there on automation of companies that are now starting to automate and make touchless things like the stores. You go into a retail store, the conveyor systems and the self-cleaning stuff, et cetera. So a lot of good things there. Humanizing big data. Internet of Things, everything gets more and more connected. And the concepts of the machine learning is how does our AR become smarter? We should send that south of the border. But anyway, so okay, let's do a quick roundtable. Maybe I'll just do it in order of the list again of the names so that everybody gets a chance there. Eileen, do you want to just sort of kick us off with a thought?
Sure. I think one really positive thing that came out of today's dialogue is the amount of opportunity now that we have for collaboration, especially in small to medium-sized businesses and boutique consulting firms. The things that were before COVID are not now. So how can we collaborate? And I could probably provide my services in another industry that my industry doesn't need so much anymore, and my industry needs others. So I think my big takeaway is, like, how can we work as consultants together to collaborate more? And maybe that's something we can be looking at the chapter level. And I think we can start engaging more in interactive sessions like this nationally, locally, and look for new opportunities to collaborate.
Okay, James?
That's a great handoff, because Eileen, I was thinking the same thing. But to build on that, I look at this almost like an hourglass where all this information is coming in. You narrow the hourglass, then how do we work together to actually, amplify that coming out of it by collaborating with this community here?
Thank you. Stephen?
I think we're all singing from the same song sheet somewhat. I think there's a great opportunity to collaborate across our colleagues across Canada, whether it's at the institute level, to get local people that are interested in this. I'm certainly looking at, as we continue to grow, I think government's going to need a lot of help and a lot of assistance to address a lot of these issues. And I think they're really exciting times. And back to Tim's point of extraordinary, I think there's some extraordinary opportunities. And I kind of like the word pivot a lot for fairly obvious reasons with my firm name of Pivot Consulting. But I think we really should look at this and come out of this as strong as we possibly can as a nation and as consultants. And I think there's opportunities for that. There's some interesting stuff that economists have certainly done that look at these significant transitions and rebirths into new fields and opportunities are really exciting times. And I think it's a great way to think about it and to collaborate together. I think it'd be wonderful.
Thanks, Kara.
I love the idea of collaboration. I've been a management consultant for probably close to 20 years now. And I always find when we work together as highly specialized consultants in our areas, we provide greater value to the client. And I'd like to find a way to work together to land larger accounts and work on bigger engagements and larger mandates. Some of the independents and boutique consulting are, a few hours here, a few hours there, but I think we can make a huge impact on much larger firms and larger engagements. So I'd like to work together to develop some kind of a framework and formula for us to do that, both locally and nationally.
Okay, Rahi.
Wow. Okay. Perfect. Perfect lead-in, Kara. Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Let's give KPMG a run for their money, shall we? Just as a very quick anecdote, I've had a lot of fellow master's students work for the Big Four, and most of them come back telling me that half their job is consulting and half of it is sales, and it's high pressure. And the CMCs, I think that if we work together and go after the larger projects that we could add more value, we won't be focusing on sales as much as we will be on adding value to the client and creating real value. And very briefly, this whole COVID situation is a fantastic opportunity for businesses, small and large, to engage in innovation. This is the environment where innovation really thrives, be it iterative, disruptive, or discontinuous. And as consultants, I think it's definitely our role to help businesses to make that happen and to make sure that they're not putting their efforts into just good ideas rather than into opportunities.
Okay, Louise.
Thank you, Rahi. And I'm going to, build on, yes, the collaboration. And I think there was a question from Marilyn Friedman on the Q&A about how can we connect better and what ways, how can we do that. I think that there's certainly lots of informal ways, as you've mentioned. I'm with Kara that I think there is some kind of framework that we can build it with CMC. I think it would be great to have another webinar session that's focused on how do we do that, and let's co-design that. Let's not outsource it to somebody to go buy some tool that doesn't work properly. So definitely yes there. And I just, you know, one other takeaway that as I'm listening to all of this in terms of opportunities, and another thing that I've noticed is, you know, a lot of organizations have amazingly flattened their decision-making structure and made it a lot quicker and more agile to make quick decisions. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity to actually help organizations build on that, to do that ourselves within CMC as well. And you know, to your point, Stephen, becoming much stronger as a nation and as an organization, being able to make decisions quickly and assemble teams to do stuff.
Okay, thank you. Ron?
Yeah, I think that all of the collaboration conversation is exactly the right thing that, you know, we should be discussing here. I think for a whole bunch of reasons. I think if there's a way to connect the dots on people who have skill A or capability B and need C, and you can connect some of those things, and there's a structural way to do that, that's a very interesting conversation. So I think that's a big thing. I think the other thing that we can do is, I think we can start to tackle, maybe in forums like this, some of the bigger questions, maybe at a deeper level, not across the economy per se, but maybe an industry at a time or a function at a time, and I think having a bunch of relevant kinds of topics that keep people thinking about things they wouldn't think about normally in an hour every 2 weeks or a set of sessions. I think that is part of an agenda we can assemble.
Okay, thank you. Louise, one more closing comment? Oh, you're off mic. There you go.
I just wanted to add to what Ron is saying. I actually think that is a great idea to develop more connections amongst ourselves as well. Because as we gather to talk about a certain subject, you've got the people who are interested in that subject. And as we discuss and talk, we get to learn what each other's expertise are and build those relationships. So I think that would be an ideal way to achieve, one of ways to achieve that goal.
Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. I think in the interest of and respect of everybody's time here, we probably need to wrap it up. If there's anybody who wants to stick around a little bit at the end, we can do that a little bit afterwards. But let me just close with thank you very much to the panelists. I mean, we've spent a little bit of time sort of connecting up and getting this thing pulled together. So appreciate all your time and effort and contributing to helping advance our profession and elevate that profession and providing hopefully some value to our members and participants here. We've had a good number of audiences and most of them haven't dropped off yet. So that usually tells you something. I'm hoping to the audience, thank you very much for participating, and that hopefully you got some good tips and techniques. I got things like understanding and assessment, the current state, future state, pushing innovation, helping chart a path for clients, focusing in on some of the human interactions, and also the technology and innovation. I think there's a clear key part. So those are just some of the things that came to the top of my mind. The attached, or we'll be sending out a combination, we'll be sending out a post-event survey in the next little bit, within the next couple of hours. And please give us your feedback in terms of what you thought about the content, the context. We'd also like your input on future topics so that we can focus around what you want to have, not what we try to dream up, because we think it's important. We'd like to engage the community of consultants and your clients and whoever is appropriate to this type of a forum. The materials will also be posted. The video recording here, we'll do our best as we can to shrink it down to a point where it can be available in delivery and move forward. So that, just go back one slide there, please. The summary I'd like to leave everybody with is, crisis breeds opportunities and races are one in the turns. If you're going in strong and you execute well, you're going to come out pretty good at the other end, and that for you and also for your clients. I've seen that and used that actually as a race car analogy as project status meetings. Here we are in the turn, guys. Now we're are we going to run into this wall or not? Using that as an icon to move forward. So my question is, are you ready to succeed and to win and to help lead your customers to success and not sit at the side and mope? So I'll leave it at that and just pass it off to Sandra just for conclusion, and also introduce another exciting event that we have next week. Sandra?
Hello. So thank you everybody for joining us, and for those of you that are still on the line, that's fantastic. We are coming to the end of our session. What I would say is watch out for a email coming out very, very shortly, which will have details around our next event, which is June 3rd. It's leverage data to help your clients succeed post-COVID. And our host and speaker at that event will be Ron Swartz. You can wave now, Ron. And we also really do encourage you to please take the survey, which you should see very shortly come out. And with that, I will say thank you, and no more questions, no more comments. We will be ending the meeting now.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, everybody.